It's 4 p.m. and we're bringing you the developing news and the stories behind the headlines. This is Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez. Some stories we're watching this Wednesday, June 5. Government agencies that attended today's Senate executive session are pushing for the declaration of POGO as a national security threat. The session tackled Bamban Mayor Alice Go's alleged ties to POGO in her municipality. The National Security Council and the Anti-Money Laundering Council were also among the session attendees. The country's inflation slightly rose at 3.9% in May from 3.8% in April. That's 0.1%. The Philippine Statistics Authority says utilities and transport were the main drivers of last month's uptrend. Canlaon City and La Castellana in Negros are now under a state of calamity due to the eruption of Mount Canlaon. The volcano is on alert level 2 and has been quiet since Monday's eruption. Joining us today, Ana Marie Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, and Storycon's resident political pundit, Ronald Llamas. Ami?
Good afternoon,
Hi,
Ami.
good afternoon, Patrick, Ronald.
Ami, so I guess that the results of today's executive session in POGO will be on your front pages tomorrow of the Philippine Star.
Yes, kasama yon. And naghihintay pa kami ng mga maglilik. Alam niyo naman yung executive session dyan. Lagi may nagsasalita. Kung ano pinag-usapan. But anyway, sabi daw nga ni Alice Go, she is not a POGO protector. And inulit niya na she is a Filipino. Yan, yung isa sa yung mga binabantayan natin. Plus the weather, of course, not a very good Wednesday, no? Maulan na. Meron daw throw ng low pressure area which is bringing the rains dito sa atin and parts of the rest of Luzon and the Visayas. Yan ang mga binabantayan. Saka baka interesado kayo yung TikTok na cyber attack.
Nasaan, Ami? Cyber attack.
May cyber attack sa TikTok, although hindi naman daw lahat mga celebrity account saka CNN na hack yung nila. Ewan ko yung kung may mga TikTok account kayo, tignan nyo. Pero yun na nga, in-announce nila na meron ng attack sa site nila. So yan ang mga binabantayan natin. And of course, yung mga follow-up dun sa formally, sabi ni former President Rodrigo Duterte, wala daw siyang natatandaang in-order na mag-transfer ng mga purchases ng
DOH.
Department of Health. Yung sinabi ni Francisco Duque, hindi daw niya natatanda na i-transfer sa DBM yung procurement. Which is strange, no? Dahil pinirmahan niya yung Bayanihan Act.
Ami, nakita mo ba yung kay
naman ni Sal Panelo, sabi niya, si Sal Panelo, the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel, natatandaan niya na meron ng ganon to facilitate nga yung emergency procurement.
Hindi rin niya natatandaan yung gentleman's agreement Diba?
Hindi, parang hindi lang niya maintindihan yung ibig sabihin ng gentleman's agreement.
Hindi,
pero
sabi
when
nga,
you listen to him, mukhang meron ng usapan, di ba?
Sabi nga niya, hindi niya alam kung saan yung ayungin Di ba?
Ayun, hindi na ako naniniwala.
Pero nakita mo ba, Ami, yung ginawa ni Joseph Morong? Yung post niya na tinanggal yung kanyang
audio. Muted yung kanyang
minute yung kanyang audio about the South China Sea. About the West Philippine Sea. TikTok. Sinisisi niya yung TikTok.
Na-mute na yung kanyang report.
Talaga?
Oo.
Okay. At this point,
ayun, merong mga move actually sa US, di ba nga, to ban TikTok, limited ban, kaya nagpo-protesta ang TikTok. Isa yan sa mga pinag-aawayan ng US at China ngayon, actually.
Unless they sell it.
Unless they sell it to Americans.
Yun na nga, unless they sell. Yung ownership ibigay sa hindi ba sinasabi nila, hindi naman daw Chinese citizen yung may-ari.
But this debate or discussion on banning TikTok in the US, it's been dragging for some time. Pero at the same time, in China, walang debate, bandang YouTube. YouTube ata, tsaka
Facebook.
ilang American social media in China, it's blocked.
Yeah.
Right? So, no debates needed.
Oh, baka dito, kung magkaroon ng ganyang problema, baka gustong bilhin ng Philippine Star ang TikTok.
Yun.
Ha? Sana nga. Ay, nag-resign nga yung nila. Well, hindi ko alam kung nag-resign, kundi magpapalit siya ng head sa Philippines. Ang TikTok, at hindi ko pa na-chismis kung bakit.
Ami, Ronald,
Baka lilipat sa mas magandang
Yeah,
Although sa mga my chats with him, yun na nga ini-insist nila na TikTok is not owned by the Chinese, although merong gray area doon eh. Kasi yung mother company, ByteDance, na nasa China, merong rule ang China, may batas ang China na kapag naka-register sa kanila, the Chinese government can tell that company, kahit private, to do whatever the government wants. So yan ang medyo malabo dyan.
May isang political pundit na nag-experiment Nag-post siya ng pro-China message sa TikTok at lumampas ng 1 million yung views.
binubus.
Oo. Nag-post siya ng anti-China, hindi lumampas ng 50. So baka kinakailangan marami pang mag-experiment ng ganyan para to build a case against TikTok.
Right. Okay, at this point, let's
Kasi
check
ang
in.
depensa nga nila, wala daw pakialam yung Chinese government.
Okay.
Sa TikTok.
Ami Ronald, at this point, let's check in on the executive session on Banban Mayor Alice Go. News 5 correspondent Ria Fernandez Obina is on the phone. Ria, what else can you tell us apart from the recommendation from the agencies who attended the session, suggesting that POGOs be considered a national security threat?
Hi, Patrick. Hi, Sir Ronald. And Miss Amy.
Hi, Ria.
4 hours, yes. 4 hours tinagal nung ating executive session dito sa Senado. And according to Senator Rizon Tiveros, mas lalo lang tumibay yung mga nauna nilang opinion ng mga senador tungkol doon sa tunay na pagkataon, pagkakakilanlan ni Banban Mayor Alice Go, no? Sabi nila, or sabi ni Senator Risa Ontiveros, yung claim ng alkalde na isa siyang Pilipino ay tila wala nagsusuporta doon base sa mga napakinggan niyang statement dito sa executive session. At bukod dito, mas lalo rin daw tumibay yung kanilang opinion pagdating naman sa alleged ties ng alkalde sa Pogo Hub na narin sa Bamban, Carla.
Ria, medyo expected na maraming babanat sa Pogo at saka kay Mayor Alice Go. Meron bang nagdepensa sa Pogo or kay Mayor Alice Go dyan sa hearing na yan?
Sir, limitado lang yung impormasyon na naibahagi sa atin ni Senator Rizon Tiveros dahil closed door yung naging executive session. Well, essentially, that is the purpose of the executive session para mas maging komportable yung mga resource person na maibahagi yung nalalaman nila tungkol sa sitwasyon ng POGO. But basically, ang pinaka-meat ng executive session, mas naalam pa daw si Senator Rita Ontiveros sa mga natuklasan niya tungkol dito sa POGO. No? Kaya nga, ang kanyang pakiusap, base na rin sa pagkakasundo nilang lahat na nasa executive session, ay iakyat na ng National Security Council kay Pangulong Bongbong Marcos ang rekomendasyon na tuluyan ng paalisin ng mga POGO sa bansa dahil isa itong national security threat.
Okay, I find it strange.
I
Ria,
understand.
no?
Kaya nag-executive session dahil may issue about money laundering. Ano yung napag-usapan na in that aspect?
Miss Amy, regarding doon sa money laundering, no? Kasi kung matatandaan nyo doon sa mga previous hearing, nasiwalat doon na dalawa sa mga naging kasosyo ni suspended Mayor Go ay konektado o sangkot sa pinakamalaking money laundering scam sa Singapore. Ang sabi sa atin ni Senator Rizon Tiveros, kailangan niya pa ng at least isang briefing kasama ang Anti-Money Laundering Council para mas mabusisi pa itong stream flow, illegal revenue flow ng pera dahil napansin nga nila o napunan nila na malaki yung perang na ipasok ng Zone 1 sa Pilipinas. So gusto niyang ma-trace yun. tinanong natin kung kailan yon mangyayari, hindi pa niya alam. And i-determine din niya kung closed door ulit to o ipapublicize nila itong briefing with AMLAC.
Patrick, di ba kayo natutuwa dito sa mga executive session ng Senate, which was supposed to be secret? No? Sa Pilipinas kasi, nothing is secret. Eh.
meron lalabas.
Lalo na, baka nandyan yung mga tika-politiko. No? Usually, meron silang leak dyan eh. Muntik silang mapatawag sa hearing dyan sa Senate eh. Dahil may mga leak sila about executive sessions.
Okay, pag sinabi kasing executive session, Rian, closed door ito. So I wonder, how did we get this information regarding POGOs being considered or seen by the National Security Council as a security threat?
Yung information na yan ay nanggaling mismo doon sa hepe ng komite, doon sa nanguna sa executive session na si Senator Ronald.
Okay.
So, ang sabi lang niya, parang mas na-strengthen niya yung kanilang mga information regarding POGO na nagagamit dito sa krimen at yun nga yung sa money laundering. No? Kaya nga, it's high time, aside from money laundering, cybercrime at saka doon sa national security issue. No? So kaya it's high time na raw para itag ang mga POGO bilang national security threat. And kasi sa Senado daw po, meron ng committee report, no? Pero ang nakikita fastest course of action ni Senator Rizal ay yung kilos magmumula na sa executive branch ng government. So, kumbaga, the ball is already in the hands of the President. Total, nabanggit na naman daw niya ng maraming benefits sa Pangulo. So, maganda daw na i-raise na o sabihin na ng Direkta ng National Security Council, i-recommenda na isang national security threat ang mga POGO sa bansa.
Okay, I understand, Rhea, that the Mayor Go, was not invited dun sa closed door meeting, pero her lawyer went to the Senate. For what purpose was this?
That is correct. Habang bumubulong yung executive session, ay nagsumite, personal na nagsumite ang mga abogado ni Mayor Go ng isang liham para kay Senator Rizal Ontiveros. So, nung binasa natin yung 7-page na letter ni Mayor Go na isinumite nga ng kanyang mga abogado, nakasaad doon yung kanyang mga explanation tungkol doon sa mga aligasyong ipinutungkol sa kanya. So kasama doon yung alleged ties niya sa POGO or bilang protektor ng mga POGO. Kasama rin doon yung kanyang pagkatao, nationality, and even yung sinasabing tunay niyang nanay na si Wendy Ling na sinasabi niya base sa sulat niya kay Senator Risa na kinakasama lang at business partner ng tatay niya dahil naninindigan siya na base doon sa birth certificate niya, ang nanay niya ay si Amelia Leal at isa siyang Pilipino. So, kumbaga kung ano yung mga narinig natin sa pagtinig, sa nakaraang pagtinig, isinulat lang niya in detail sa liham.
We have some information here, Rhea, that yung tatay ni Alice Go at saka yung nanay niya are no longer in the country. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, sabi nga ni Senator, tinanong din natin kay Senator Rizal Ontiveros kung papaano ba yun, no? Kasi in the past hearing, the senators are keen on having the father and the mother of Mayor Go to be present in the hearing, in the next hearing, para matapos na yung mga tanong nila tungkol sa identity ng alkalde. Kaya lang, may informasyon ng gano'n na wala dito sa Pilipinas. Yung tatay ni Mayor Go and yung nanay nga, alleged nanay ni Mayor Go. Pero sabi niya, Senator, magandang makadalo sila sa pagdinig para once and for all yung mga tanong nila regarding Mayor Alice Go ay matugunan o masagot na.
Okay, Rhea, aside from the
Yung invitation was sent to the mayor, hindi ba? Did she not show up o authorized ba? Okay ba sa Senate na ang pinadala na lang niya abogado niya? Pwede bang sabihin na she snubbed the hearing?
Miss Abby, dito sa executive session, we personally asked Senator Risa if invited si Mayor Go. Ang sabi niya sa atin, hindi daw. So, sabi yung mga co-enforcement agencies lang, yung dumalo dito sa executive session kasi nga gusto niyang mas maging komportable, mas makalsal o makupay yung mga dapat ipayin tungkol sa tunay na sitwasyon ng mga POGO sa bansa. For Mayor Go, she will be invited again to face the Senate hearing sa mga susunod na pagdinig. It's Just that kailangan daw muna magkaroon ng briefing with AMLAC bago mangyari yung pagpapatuloy ng mga public hearing.
Okay, maraming salamat. Ria Fernandez.
Maraming salamat, Ria.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ria.
Okay, that was News 5 correspondent in the Senate, Ria Fernandez Obina. Executive session, pero kahit pa paano may leak. Would you consider that a leak? It's medyo broad yung statement. It was just one statement na the National Security Council, at least from their meeting with the National Security Council, they are
Hindi
convinced.
ko alam
the Senate
yung
is
rules
convinced
sa
na-
executive session, no? Gano'n ka-strict. Pero nakita naman natin in the past na very loose yung information at maraming lumalabas.
Okay,
Nagwala nga dati
but normally anonymous yung source. This time, the source is the chairman of the
Yes,
committee,
yes.
Senator Rizal Ontiveros.
Usually, last time na naalala ko, nagreklamo mismo si Senator Jinggoy at ipapatawag daw yung politiko sa hearing, no? Dahil dun sa, panyata yan, alleged plot, yung mga previous alleged plots to oust the Senate President. So, nag-leak daw, etc. Pero hindi naman natuloy. Hindi naman yata
Pero
natuloy.
natuloy rin. Natuloy rin. Eventually, hindi natuloy noon, pero natuloy rin.
Oo. So, natatawa ako dyan sa mga executive session na ganyan.
But Senator Rizal Ontiveros
Trabaho
was the one
ng
who
mga
confirmed it.
Trabaho ng mga Philstar na alamin yung mga executive session
Hindi,
na yan.
sabi ko nga, baka kinukulit siguro, Patrick, nag-cover ka sa Senate.
Oo
Alam
nga,
mo naman,
kulitan
siyempre,
yan eh.
nangungulit siguro yung mga journalist eh. Di ba?
Right.
Susubuan ka dyan ng mikropono. O sige na naman, konti lang kahit ano nangyari.
Tapos yung-
Kaya siguro nagsalita.
Yung mga ilang salitang binitiwan, malaking story
Yes.
na yan. Kaya natin pa extend ng
Yes.
malaking story.
Oo.
Oo. Yan talaga. But in fairness, it's not a lot of details coming out of that executive session.
Yes.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Bago,
As of
sariwang-sariwa pa eh. Baka bukas, mas marami.
Abangan. Abangan.
Dahil yung sa Senate noon, yung kay Jinggoy, talagang yung exact numbers ng mga sino ang for, against, lumabas eh. Pati yung mga pangalan kung sino, di ba?
Kaya nga, oo. Mga magabang-abang tayo mga 1 or 2 days.
Yeah. Ganyan talaga mga reporter sa Pilipinas amin, no? Alam mo, minsan naalala ko, way back when I was a Senate reporter, there was a meeting here of ASEAN Defense Minister. Inambush ko yung Defense Minister ng Singapore. I just walked up to him and stuck out my mic and asked an interview. Aba, pinagalitan ako isang Singaporean minister because that's not done in their country pala. You just don't walk up to a high official.
Well,
of
halimbawa,
government.
it's not in the Senate, sa Malacanang, no? Closed-door cabinet meeting tungkol doon kay Police Chief Purisima, no? Na eventually hiningi ng presidente na siya ay mag-resign. In less than 3 minutes, nakita na namin yung balita sa isang online. So lahat kami nagkatinginan.
Oo.
Sino naglabas ng balita?
Ang bilis.
Oo, ang bilis. Less than 3
Bilis.
minutes, ha? Labas sa...
Chat group.
Ronald, yung mga official nyo nun, merong mga contact yun sa mga reporter.
Oo nga.
Ite-text lang eh.
Oo nga. Sabi ng
Ang
presidente.
dahan-dahan na yun. Baka
sabi ng
nag-uusap pala
presidente,
kayo, nagte-text
saan
na.
nanggaling yun?
But Ronald, yung mga ganyan leak,
Yeah.
nothing is leaked by accident. It's always deliberate. At saka may kumbaga may objective yun.
Yeah.
Yung leak. Any
Exactly.
leak. Every leak.
Exactly.
Right? Diba? Parang controlled release of information yun eh.
Mahirap yung
May
mangyari.
deniability pa rin kayo.
Mahirap yan mangyari sa China, na very ideological yung state at very ideological yung ruling party. Mahirap mangyari yung ganyang klaseng mga leaks. Sa Pilipinas ay mas madali. Dahil wala namang ideology rito.
Okay. Anyway, Ami, Ronald, you're watching Storycon and One News. We just need to take a quick break, but we will be right back.
Yung pala ilabangan nila. Lako. Wala.
Lapitan nyo agad yung lapitan nyo agad
Kinuha nila yung para drop.
yung item kagad, lapitan nyo, yung item. Ayun yung item
Talihan, lagat nila.
Yung item yung lapitan nyo, yung item.
May naulog.
Huli niya naulog, pangkain na.
Sa kanila yan, naulog yung tropa nila.
Ha?
Naulog. Yung item ko ninyo, yung parachute, kunin yung parachute.
Lako. Lako, meron pa parachute. Loko to. Dinadakitan talaga nila. Naku, babagay lata. Ultik na. Babagayin.
Hilahin nyo yung parachute. Hilahin, dalhin sa pangura.
It's like patintero.
Yeah, it's a child's game.
It's a child's game. Hello, Amy. With us here in Studio 10 is Ray Powell. Okay, he is of Project SeaLight, a maritime transparency project at the Stanford University. For those of us who follow his handle on X, the former Twitter, it's Gordon, not Ray. He is the one responsible for posting those images, I think those satellite images of the Chinese vessels massing in the West Philippine Sea. The last time you made a post was that what appeared to be the largest gathering of Chinese vessels in anticipation of the Atin Ito regatta.
Yeah, there was a large concentration of Chinese vessels at Scarborough Shoal that I had never seen before, and they were clearly concerned about the upcoming civilian convoy, and they wanted to make sure that they successfully blockaded those boats away from Scarborough Shoal.
Ray, first question, I'm kind of curious, how do you get these images?
So actually, so this particular image, the one you just saw on the screen, is a overhead satellite photo, which I get from commercial satellites that I have access to, sometimes through Planet Labs, which has a contract with Stanford University, and sometimes through a provider called Sky-Fi, with which I have a very good relationship, and they are actually a low-cost way to get to satellite images. Okay. But the other images, for example, when we can see the ships moving around, we see through tracking what we call their AIS broadcast, which is Automatic Information System. And all civilian ships, large civilian ships, are supposed to use this. Now, what we find for China's ships, of course, is sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But when they don't, we call that going dark. So that allows us to see a lot of what's happening in the West Philippine Sea.
And what's the interest of SeaLight in trying to highlight these activities of the Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese Navy?
So SeaLight is a maritime transparency project, and so we just truly believe, we're very mission driven, we believe that when you eliminate the grayness of the gray zone, when you basically turn on the lights and show the world what is actually happening, that a lot of the things that happen in the gray zone, like harassment, like coercion, like illegal fishing, these things are exposed and then they can be dealt with. And when you don't see that is when they thrive and they can do whatever they want.
What do you say about your detractors who say that this transparency project of yours, this Miusho project, is similar almost to a QAnon conspiracy, no? With superpowers manning it or running it. I first heard about it late last year, but I think they've been talking about it much longer, no?
Yeah,
So my first impression is, what's wrong with transparency?
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would. So first of all, I get lots of different accusations.
Yeah.
Some is that I work for naval intelligence,
Yeah.
and the funny thing is, I was in the Air Force. I
Yeah.
actually don't have a connection to the Navy, although they have correctly noted that the Gordian Knot Center, which is the center that hosts SeaLight, or that SeaLight falls under, has in the past received some money from the Office of Naval Research. Unfortunately, SeaLight does not get any of that particular money. Not that I would be happy to get money. If anyone has money, I'm happy to take it. But no, we are actually an all-volunteer organization. And that's very hard to disprove, right? I mean, it's very hard to disprove. If somebody accuses you of getting money that you don't have, how do you prove that you didn't get money, right? Yeah. But I mean, almost everybody who works for SeaLight is a volunteer. Actually, everybody who works. I will say this, the only people who receive any money whatsoever is there is a very small number of students at Stanford University who are getting very small stipends so that they can cover their costs if they do
Yes.
research with the Gordian Knot Center.
But as a concept, no, what's wrong with transparency?
I'm big on
Yeah,
transparency.
yeah.
Obviously, that's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's generally the bad things tend to happen in dark places. And so I'm a fierce advocate of transparency. I'd like to see transparency in government. I like to see transparency in the maritime gray zone, which is what I cover. So,
I understand that SeaLight was
Mr.
brought
Powell,
about. Yes,
you're
Amy.
talking about maritime gray zones, and other countries have expressed concern about this. Not just the U.S., there's Japan, Australia. Are you seeing similar gray zone operations in other parts of the world?
yes, the answer is yes. Ami, we see them in the East China Sea, for example. You also see there are huge parts of. So we recently were talking on our podcast that I do back in the States with Ian Urbina, who runs something called the Outlaw Ocean Project. And what he has gone all over the world doing reports on illegal fishing, human rights violations. The thing about the maritime gray zone is it is a perfect place for bad things to happen because nobody is watching you, right? You're often in international waters, you're often in ungoverned space. So it is a problem globally. The South China Sea problem, the West Philippine Sea problem, is a very specific problem because it involves this large state actor, China, which is using its gray zone tactics to push other countries out of its very large maritime claims.
From your
So
vantage
how
point,
might countries deal with this? What are the responses that have been proposed?
Well, so every country tends to deal with it in a little bit of a different way. And actually, one of the things that I have observed is that the Philippines' last, say, year and a half of assertive transparency, which is my word for it, has been a game changer. It has brought something very new and something that the world really needs to pay attention to and figure out, can this be replicated in other parts of the gray zone, and not just in the maritime space, in the cyberspace, in space, in the financial space. There are lots of different places where you could apply the same idea, because when you actually show the public what is happening, the Philippines has, I think, actually gained several very valuable things. One is a great deal of national resiliency. You guys just finished this discussion about the Pogos and Mayor Go, and why is it that everybody is suddenly looking into this? Because the nation is becoming more resilient against these things. That is often that I would propose to you that this transparency has yielded that kind of national resilience. You also have seen an uptick in international support. President Marcos was the keynote speaker at Shangri-La that just finished in Singapore. International stage, he was the keynote speaker. Why? Because the Philippines is at the center of attention. The Philippines has changed the game. And so they didn't go and pick some defense minister from a big power. They didn't go and find the prime minister of Japan again. They went to the Philippines because the Philippines is the one who has made a difference.
from your vantage point, what do you think about that keynote speech of the president? Because his detractors are saying here this past few days that he went overboard in saying that he's crossing the Rubicon speech, that we are going to, it's close to war if a single Filipino is killed in this Chinese aggression, even if that Filipino is a civilian. So what do you think? Because this has been an issue these past few days.
I honestly, I think that he just stated what is a reality, which is, and I think that China needs to know that the Philippines takes this seriously, that you can't just go around water cannoning everyone in sight because somebody's going to get hurt. They are considered to be non-lethal weapons, but that doesn't mean they can't kill somebody, right? So he's just trying to send a message. Now, he didn't say he was going to war. The question, he was answering a question about red lines, about whether or not this would be considered an act of war. And he said, look, we're getting close to that, right? And that's a real concern, right? What happens then to the discussion? Does it mean that everybody's going to go to war? Of course not, right? But what it means is we take this into a whole new space. I could easily see this creating quite a diplomatic crisis.
Yeah.
Do you see China sort of stepping up its activities or its aggression?
100%, absolutely. I mean, the
level. Where are they coming from, and where are they now?
So, if I were to put this back a year and a half, they would have had just a couple of ships around Scarborough Shoal, a couple around Ayungin Shoal. They would have maybe a few up back at Mischief Reef. Now there are, at any given time, at least a dozen around Scarborough Shoal. They are now have pushed past Ayungin Shoal and now are at Sabina Shoal on a full-time basis, right? There is always a ship there. Now, what the Philippines has done is send out its own ship. Yeah. Yes, one of the 97-meter ships, the BRP Toyos Magbanwa. Because the Philippines wants to say, we are not just going to let you take this without us contesting it. And you can see China is very annoyed by it, right? They would like the Philippines not to be there, but the Teresa Magbanwa has not moved in over a month and a half. So the Philippines is finally, able to go out and say, no, we are going to contest you here.
China seems to be very interested in Sabina.
Yes. Yeah. So there has been a presence there actually annually for quite a while, usually a small number of what we call rafted vessels. So these are the Spratly backbone fishing vessels that tie themselves together and sit there and do nothing. And why do they do nothing? One is, from China's perspective, they establish their presence. From the fishing vessels, what's happening is they're getting a fuel subsidy to go to the Spratlys and to sit. They don't have to do anything, and if they don't do anything, they're not using any fuel, and they get to keep the money. Right? So their job is to go there and stay together. And so that's what they have done, and they're still doing that. But now you're seeing active Chinese Coast Guard, active maritime militia moving around the shoal. And of course, we've also seen this, apparently, they're beginning to dump coral and build up sort of an above water feature there.
Is this a simple case of a racket, Chinese sailors and Navy men trying to earn an extra buck? Or is there a strategic consequence or implication in their presence there, in their continued presence?
Well, okay, so
what's happening? You mentioned a while ago, they're dumping corals.
Yeah.
They're to the uninitiated, they would presume it's island building activity or something like that. What is happening?
So I think okay, from the sailor's perspective, these are the ones that tie themselves together are fishing boats that don't fish. They're instead getting money for the government for fuel subsidies and not using it so that they can keep the money. But they are doing that because the Chinese state wants them to do that. Because what they're doing is, over time, you say, okay, we have these vessels there, and over time we can say we've always been there, and everybody knows it's ours because we've always been there.
It's occupation.
Exactly. And then over time they can. So now they dump coral, right? And then they take something that used to be below water, and now it's above water, and they can say, look, this is territory.
Yes.
And we claim this territory because this is Chinese territory. Yes. We've always been there because our boats are all tied together there. So, under international law, something that's above water qualifies as being territory. So
it generates territorial
sea. Now, Probably, almost certainly under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, they would not recognize this as being legitimate territory. They would say, no, you put this here, this is artificial, right? And that's what they've done with a lot of China's artificial islands, is they've said, you don't get a territorial sea if you dump concrete there and make a runway, because under international law, that's still a reef.
Yes.
Because that's what it was before you showed up. So I think this idea of dumping the coral and sort of walking away, and then they can't say you did this because, well, who says we did this?
It
do you have pictures?
spontaneously grew from the sea, no?
Exactly.
Like everything, no?
Yes.
But on a different topic, you saw earlier the dangerous maneuvers between
Yes.
our small supply boats and the Chinese Coast Guard.
Yes,
In situations like this, accidents can happen.
of course.
My question is, what is the process of invoking the Mutual Defense Treaty from the side of the Americans?
Yeah.
How does it go? Congress, executive, etc. So we've been talking about that
Yep.
in a basically theoretical manner. But in concrete terms, how does it unfold?
So the complicated answer to your simple question is it depends.
Yeah.
So the Mutual Defense Treaty is not like a light switch. You know, it's not on or off. Actually, it's more like a dimmer switch, right? It's like, how high up do you turn it? So in some ways, we've already kind of turned it up a little bit, because for the last year and a half especially, we have been repeatedly talking about the mutual defense. Every time something happens, the U.S. official will come out and say, this is the U.S. commitment under the Mutual Defense Treaty, you know, over and over. So it's being invoked already. But
Ironclad.
what's that? Ironclad. We love the word ironclad in the United States. It is a great word. But, you know, so it's, in some ways it's already being invoked, right? But the question is, what does it mean if, for example, let's say a Philippine sailor gets killed, and then what it would chase us to is consultations, right? Because you know, probably President Marcos would call President Biden and say, "This has happened. What do we?" And so the next stage is consultations. Nobody just sort of then says, "Okay, the light switch is on, and now we're at war."
Yeah.
That's not the way these things work. And thank goodness, right? I mean, you don't want to have that going on, you know. But you know, so it depends.
Mr. Powell, going back to the responses, there are proposals to borrow a page from the China Coast Guard and to develop a Coast Guard of our own with the power to engage, well, maybe not in combat, but to put arms in our Coast Guard ships, maybe, you know, powerful water cannons as well. What do you think of that idea?
So what China is doing to the Philippines is attacking
Yes.
you asymmetrically, right? So what that
Yeah.
means is
Yes.
it has, for example, more and larger ships than the Philippines does. And that's not going to change anytime soon, right? So even if the Philippines increases its maritime capacity with, for example, these new ships from Japan, absolutely that's a good thing, and it should definitely do that, right? But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden the Philippines should then go out and go toe-to-toe symmetrically with the Chinese, because they still have the advantage if you go sort of directly at them. So I think it's wise for the Philippines to do things asymmetrically also. Where does the Philippines have strength? The Philippines have strength, first of all, in its legal standing on the international stage, in its moral authority as being the clearly aggrieved party, recognized by almost everybody who's not in Beijing. It has a network now, a growing network of partners and allies. Now it has Japan that is coming in and beginning to work on this reciprocal access agreement. You have the quadrilateral things going on with Australia and the US and Japan. So the Philippines, I think, is wisely trying to figure out, where do we have asymmetric advantages where we can put pressure back on China? And I think that by being transparent, by opening this up to the world, by growing the network, now again you've got the trilateral summit in Washington, D.C. You've got President Marcos appearing on the international stage. The Philippines is learning how to fight back asymmetrically.
Okay. The Global Times of China.
Talking about asymmetrical strategy, what do you think about this ragtag civilian missions in the West Philippine Sea, like the Christmas mission last December and this Baho de Masinloc? Because this doesn't fall within the Mutual Defense Treaty framework. No, it's very clear that in the fine details of the treaty, there's nothing about invoking it based on attacks on civilians.
Well, this is the Philippines' civil society rising up and fighting back, right? And that's another one of the Philippines' asymmetric advantages, is that you are a democracy. You have civil society groups who have their own way to rise up. I know that there were things that came out that suggested that I was somehow behind this viewing. Honestly, I've never met any of these people.
You've only met Ronald for the first
well,
time.
I have no idea. But it is a sign of the national resilience that is growing in the Philippines as a result of the transparency campaign. I just want to keep giving credit to the Philippine government for turning on the lights, for turning on the cameras, because this is the kind of thing, a country can't fight back against this kind of aggression, especially a democratic country, unless you have the people of the country behind you. And this civilian convoy is a symptom of that kind of support.
Do you think it's working, given that China's response was to, in some way,
Scale up.
escalate?
Oh yeah, China is
By threatening
escalating.
to arrest
Arrest
trespassers.
So I think this is still early in the game, right? So the issue is the Philippines turns on the cameras. China is clearly unhappy, and now China has made the determination, we will try to escalate the Philippines out of its position. So they want to say, we can take this longer than you can. And so far the Philippines said, try me, right?
The Philippines would have to make a call or simply back down. So what kind of escalation can the Philippines do
So, I mean,
at this point? What kind of response?
right now China has escalated, right? And it is using up resources, physical resources like fuel and ships and those kinds of things that it takes to elevate its response at the features, but also its own international reputation. To what I think one of the questions is, to what extent will China begin to start incurring a geopolitical cost, an economic cost for its activities, as people begin to start back away and realize this aggressive China is not a version that we want to have represented on the international stage in the way that it has in the past. And at some point, what I think the Philippines will hope for is that China will change course and say,
Okay.
this is not working in China's national interest.
That's the
Mr.
wish.
Powell,
That's
so
the wish
what do you
of
think of the Philippines turning it into an environmental issue? Because that's what some of our government officials are now considering, on top of the arbitration, of course.
Filing
We
a
are
new
going to
case.
file an environmental complaint.
I
Do you
think
think it has any chances?
I do. I think, first of all, I think it's based in fact, right? I mean, and one of the weaknesses that the Philippines does face is it faces an access problem. So, for example, one of the places that we suspect tremendous environmental damage is at Scarborough Shoal, right? Because China has controlled it since 2012, and of course is not going to allow in international bodies to go investigate. But we know that China's giant clam harvesting is an extremely destructive practice. We've seen this reported over and over again.
Yes.
This is where they go in, they go deep into the reefs. They don't just pull the giant clams out, but they spew the residue all over the reef, which kills off great parts of the reef. So this is something we know happens. We know China has been doing this and continues to do this to this day. And if the Philippines is able to get enough evidence, I think it has a great potential to make a difference on the international stage.
And these giant
Well,
clams
in
are
case
older
we
than
win,
all
we
our
win
age
the
put
case.
together.
What might be the consequences for China?
Well,
In case we win an environmental complaint.
so of course, what we've seen in the past is that China ignores the rulings, right? They say this does
Yes.
not apply to us. So I think that China will be tempted to do the same thing again. But what happened from the 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling? Certainly, China ignored it. But almost
Yes.
the entire world recognizes that the Philippines was right. People talk about this everywhere in the world. The Philippines it was clearly ruled in the Philippines' favor, and people everywhere else refer to this as being legally binding. So, this is another example of asymmetric, a response. So, relying on the Philippines' legal and moral authority by being the aggrieved party, by representing the truth, I think is an advantage in favor of the Philippines.
So you would consider transparency, all these transparency initiatives, including Atin Ito or the government, our Philippine government's own measured transparency, I think that's their term. do you see this as our own gray zone strategy?
And is it having an impact on China in a positive way?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I would call it a counter gray zone strategy, and I would go further as I think this is one of the most innovative counter gray zone strategies the world has seen. And so I am hoping that through more and more recognition of what the Philippines has done here, it will inspire other governments in other domains to use a similar strategy to expose this kind of state-based gray zone aggression, right? And so I think I being an optimist, hope that in 5 years we're looking back at this moment and saying this is where the Philippines really educated the world and changed the game. The question of what is China doing in response? Right now, again, China is not listening, they are escalating. The question is, at what point does China reach the point where it says this escalation is not working to our favor? Our national interests are not served by trying to push and push and push so aggressively on every front to where it's costing us everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, because, Ray, Chinese society, it's a closed society, remember. I don't think they're big on transparency.
No.
So
No.
maybe transparency is not the best way, maybe, to convince the Chinese to step back or take it down a notch.
So the question is, who are you trying to reach, right? And as you say, their information environment does not allow the truth to get into China. They get to see what the Communist Party wants them to see. So that really you're dealing with ultimately with an audience of one in Xi Jinping, right? We know that he is the ultimate decider there.
Okay.
And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get him to the point where he says, China's national interests are not served best this way. We are paying too high a cost internationally. We have other things we want to do. Why are we spending so much time sort of running into the wall here in the West Philippine Sea when all we have to do is turn the temperature back down?
So in some ways it's easier because all you need to do is convince one person.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Or
Now, he's not the easiest person to reach.
or your main audience is your own population, and then the allies, and then the world.
Okay.
Right.
Now, talking about the world, allies, and for sure the Western world is on this. But I'm not so sure whether it is working. It is helping convince, let's say, transparency. This transparency initiative is helping convince our neighbors within ASEAN.
Yeah. Well, I think
They
you're
seem
right.
to have a different mind on this.
I agree. And many of the ASEAN nations for many years have tried to lay low and believe that they are sort of managing the China situation. So several things happen. One is I think that the Philippines situation just turned more urgent because of a couple things. One is geography. A lot of these features that we're talking about are in the Philippines EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone. Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia and Brunei do not have a large Chinese military base like Mischief Reef in their exclusive economic zones. That's something unique to the Philippines. They are not facing a blockade of one of their military outposts at Ayungin Shoal like the Philippines is. Nothing like that is happening to any of China's neighbors. Other neighbors.
Ronald's point, that's the point he's been making vis-a-vis other ASEAN countries.
So
right?
if another ASEAN country wags their finger and says, why can't the Philippines be smart like us? Say, okay, wait till China blockades one of your military outposts and then come back and talk to me, right? Wait until they won't allow your fishermen to go to one of their major important fishing grounds that feeds an entire coastline and provides food security for your nation, and see if you're quite so sanguine about we can manage them. So the Philippines geographically does have a harder problem than those countries.
Okay.
But Mr. Powell, do you actually see ASEAN changing its stand on the issue?
I see ASEAN is
It's
continuing.
been several
Continuing where
decades
they are.
already. I don't remember them ever supporting the Philippines.
I think that the administration here is wise to look elsewhere. Not that you don't keep making the case to ASEAN, you have to do that. But I think expecting ASEAN to come through. So, for example, on the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea, I honestly believe that will never, ever, ever be a thing.
Yes.
Because it is simply, the interests are too divergent. So why do we talk about a Code of Conduct? Because the Declaration of Conduct that was signed in 2002 has not been enforced. It is unenforceable. And so they said, well, we need an enforceable one. Well, who's going to enforce that? Will China allow anyone not named China to enforce it?
Yes.
Right? So how are you going to come to an enforceable code of conduct?
Yes.
So I think that ASEAN will remain an important forum for many things, but not for this.
Yes, but
should
ASEAN,
we
the
be
member
invoking
countries of
ASEAN
ASEAN
centrality?
also changed positions.
Is it a good idea?
Like Malaysia during the time of Mahathir was very critical of China. No? Unlike now during the time of Anwar Ibrahim. Singapore shifts position. Sometimes more critical, sometimes less critical. Vietnam is now organizing a strategic partnership with the US.
Yeah.
That has never happened before. Thailand is similar to Singapore. Sometimes shifting here, sometimes shifting there. Indonesia also has moments vis-a-vis China where they even bomb Chinese vessels in the middle of the sea, the poachers.
Right.
But of course, Prabowo is still a question mark.
Sure.
Yeah. So even ASEAN, even if now
Yeah.
they're more sympathetic
Yeah.
or more not really pro-China,
Yeah.
but more anti-engagement with China. At particular moments, the members of ASEAN also change
Yes.
foreign policy.
Of course. And, I mean, to be honest, so do our countries,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The foreign policy of Rodrigo
Will it
Duterte was
change?
different for
Will
this
it change in November?
So I was in government at the time of the first Trump administration, and there were differences, but I will say there was also a lot of important things that happened. To be honest, the beginning of that administration was where, honestly, the U.S. finally sort of came out of its national delusion about whether China would be somebody we could woo into our system, right? We for many, many years, we thought just a little more capitalism, just a little
several
more,
decades.
little more openness, then we'll finally come over. And finally, at the beginning of the first Trump administration, or the only Trump administration so far, there was a new national security set of documents written that we said they are competing with us, we have to compete back. So, you never know. I tend to be optimistic about those kinds of things. And I think that the recognition that we need to turn our attention to this part of the world is actually across the board very strong, whether it be in the Republican side or the Democratic side. I did hear you ask about ASEAN centrality, and I want to address it. I think that ASEAN centrality can be useful in a lot of areas. I don't think that ASEAN has demonstrated that it can be central in a security sense. There's just not the will or the interest or the infrastructure there to make that happen. So I think that ASEAN has its limits, as every organization
to
does.
begin with, I think it's really founded as an economic organization.
Yeah, so I mean,
Right.
I think that there are people who would like ASEAN to be very central, and I think that that's very attractive in many ways. It's just there are certain things that it's just not well equipped to deal with, and I think security is one.
Yes.
Ami, Ronald, Ray,
Our
thank you.
president mentioned it in his speech about ASEAN centrality when he talked in Singapore.
Ray, thank you for joining the Story Conference today.
Patrick, it has been a pleasure.
Okay, Ami.
Thank you, Mr.
Ami,
Powell.
Ronald, thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Hope we can invite you again.
Absolutely. Next time I'm in town. Patrick, thank you.
Join us again tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez. We are One News, all sides, all the time.